Let's go to Washington now, joined by Simon Marks to bring us the latest. Simon, good to have you. According to the Minister of International Relations here in South Africa, this move by Washington disregards the set, I suppose, systems of engagement which are diplomatic. Do you think Washington really pays regard to that?
Look, I think it's a completely new day here in Washington, D.C. Marco Rubio making this announcement on Elon Musk's social media platform. There's no evidence that the government was provided any advance warning that this was coming, that the ambassador was provided any advance warning that he was about to be declared persona non grata by Donald Trump's Secretary of State. That is the way in which this American government does business. And there are, of course, calls for normal diplomatic channels to be used to convey these kind of messages and to discuss tensions in the bilateral relationship between Washington and Pretoria. But this is not an American government that does business that way. It doesn't operate always through normal diplomatic channels. And there is precedent for this. I think it's worth underscoring that Ambassador Ebrahim Rasool is not the first member of the diplomatic community here in Washington, D.C., suddenly to find himself on the outs with President Donald Trump. If you go back to 2019, the British ambassador to Washington, Lord Kim Darroch, suddenly woke up to a Donald Trump tweet that declared him no longer someone that the United States was willing to do business with. That was after a confidential cable that he sent to the government in London was leaked by a conservative, prominent right-wing activist in the UK. In the cable, Kim Darroch described the Trump administration as inept and insecure, and that enraged the President of the United States, and so the British ambassador suddenly had to pack his bags and leave. And again, that was conveyed to London through a posting on Donald Trump's social media platform at the time. So this is the way both Trump administrations have done business, and this Trump administration even more so, because it is unconstrained by the kind of more orthodox voices in the room that were part of the Trump administration first time around. Now this American government, helmed by Donald Trump with Marco Rubio as Secretary of State, is made up entirely of proven supporters of Donald Trump's Make America Great Again movement. And as South Africa has witnessed over the last few weeks, the President and his Secretary of State on occasion will articulate disinformation in announcing policy towards South Africa. So the claim that both the President and the State Department have made that the expropriation of Afrikaner farms without compensation is taking place is something that the Secretary of State and the South Africa and the American President have never walked back, nor have they yet agreed to meet a delegation from South Africa, from the government, that wants to come here and at least correct the record on that very, very specific claim that has partly fueled this new diplomatic impasse between Washington, D.C. and Pretoria. And so I suppose the real question is, if Ambassador Ebrahim Rasool could not get his telephone calls answered by the State Department or the White House, how is his successor, how is President Ramaphosa going to convey to Donald Trump that it is time for a serious conversation, as former President Thabo Mbeki has been saying in South Africa today, for a proper conversation in detail that looks at the concerns that the United States government, elected as it has been by a plurality of voters in the last election here in November, can sort of drill down and have a sensible diplomatic conversation. Right. At the moment, it's still very unclear how you get from where things are now to that kind of an outcome.
Even the strategic interest that the minister points to, some 600 or so American companies that have interests here in South Africa, is that not enough, at least for the Donald Trump administration to sit around the table and say, let's have a listen to what South Africa has to say?
Well, it hasn't been enough so far, and I think that, we all understand that the Trump administration operates in a very transactional fashion, as President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine discovered just a couple of weeks ago. Donald Trump was perfectly willing to engage in the public drubbing of Ukraine's wartime leader in the Oval Office. So all of these diplomatic relationships are not operating on traditional and orthodox levels. The amount of South African business here in the United States is insufficient, I think, to attract Donald Trump's attention. We know that President Ramaphosa and members of his government have been looking at possible ways of engaging in a more transactional relationship with the United States, perhaps by talking about energy, about minerals, about resources, and using those conversations to try and help underpin more of a transactional relationship between the United States and South Africa. But, there is an external problem in all of this. This decision that Marco Rubio announced last night, and let me tell you that the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Senator Jim Risch, of Idaho, has backed Marco Rubio to the hilt. He's taken to X, Elon Musk's social media platform, over the last few hours to say, "I applaud Secretary Rubio for calling out the South African ambassador's disgraceful anti-American hate speech. Suffice it to say that he, the South African ambassador, is not cut out for diplomacy." All of this was fueled by an article in Breitbart News by Joel Pollak, an influential supporter of President Trump's Make America Great Again movement, whose coverage of South Africa in that right-leaning website has become increasingly influential in the corridors of power at the White House and among some Republicans on Capitol Hill. And it was the publication of that article in Breitbart News that clearly led Secretary of State Marco Rubio to take the action, the stunning, dramatic action that he took last night. So for government in Pretoria, the issue is not just how do you bring the diplomatic relationship, how do you return it to a path of normality, and how do you lower the temperature. There also has to be a strategy for trying to push back against what the South African government will argue is misinformation and incorrect reporting that on some occasions has appeared in the far-right press here and has been used by the White House and the State Department to justify the hostile positions that they're adopting towards the South African government.
Some experts in South Africa have been saying that South Africa and the country's position on Israel would probably be a stumbling block toward that recalibration of diplomatic ties, because it's highly unlikely that South Africa is going to change that position.
Yeah, there's no question that that is as much at the heart of this as the concerns that the US government has expressed over the Expropriation Act. It is that move by the South African government to push for war crimes charges against Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and other members of his inner circle at the ICJ that has also fueled the move to split the United States asunder from South Africa. As you know, there are prominent Republicans, including President Donald Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance, who insist that American support for Israel and for its Prime Minister is absolutely ironclad. We've already seen the Israeli Prime Minister welcomed to the White House by Donald Trump just in the weeks since he returned to power. And so that is a huge stumbling block as well, because unless there is a shift in South African policy on this matter, and there evidently is not going to be one, there is no real way, I think, of mending the fences that have been broken. Certainly diplomatic explanation and discussion can occur. And look, the United States government is fully aware that its current position on the crisis in the Middle East and its current close relationship with the Israeli government and Donald Trump's threat to take over the Gaza Strip and turn it into the Riviera of the Middle East after expelling more than 2 million Palestinians who call the Gaza Strip home. The US government is fully aware that there is barely any international support and only opposition to those positions that it's adopting. But in the muscular manner that this government operates, it's still going to be very, very difficult, I think, for the South African government to find a way of brokering any kind of agreement over the Middle East beyond an agreement to disagree. And that, I suppose, is the real prize at the end of the day that may be available, an agreement to disagree, but that still seems to be a very long way away.
Simon Marks, thanks for coming on. Good to chat to you this afternoon.